Mark, welcome. With me here is an intellectual and a politician from Lebanon. He is a reformer, he's from the opposition, and he has a lot to reform given the state of Lebanon. So without further ado, paint us a picture first of the trends in the Middle East and Lebanon, Middle East and North Africa region, and then we'll work our way to Lebanon.
I think first, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. A great honor. I really enjoyed your speech.
Thank you. Since 2010, with the Arab Spring, I think the Middle East has gone through a major transition. And that transition is leading to massive social changes, which are starting to express themselves in politics. As we see the dying set of Islamist movements that exploded onto the scene after 2010 and are starting to dwindle gradually and being replaced by a massive movement that's happening in the Gulf towards opening up that region towards a different type of lifestyle and work.
So you mean the reforms by Mohammed bin Salman?
Yes, the
in
reforms,
Dubai, in Qatar,
exactly.
all across the
region.
region.
The World Cup in Qatar, the Expo 2022 in Dubai, what we're seeing in Saudi Arabia with all the massive festivals that are happening. I think there's a massive transition.
Cristiano Ronaldo is now in Saudi Arabia.
Exactly.
With his girlfriend, he's not married.
Exactly.
And he has many children.
Those are big changes.
Yeah.
And I think those changes are indicative of changing times. Back in 1979, we had two major things that happened in the Middle East, which changed the face of the Middle East.
And the world.
Exactly, but we get impacted more. So in
closer.
1979, you have in Iran the revolution. That revolution got an Islamist strict regime into control. The same thing happened in Mecca with the uprising that happened in Mecca and the consolidation of Islamist power over and a grab and interpretation of what happened there, along with in Afghanistan, the jihadis and their fight against the Soviet Union at the time. That gave a lot of momentum and a lot of strength to that perspective, and it spread to Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood and others,
so
and it
you're
became militarized.
Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, three things happening at the same time led to this explosion.
Exactly, that was a massive explosion across the Islamic world with all of that, even reaching to the Philippines, to India, to Malaysia, to Indonesia.
We suffer from Wahhabi Islam. In fact, everyone says Allah Hafiz instead of Khuda Hafiz. And Farsi was the official language of India from 1192. And most of the viewers will know this, till 1858, until the British replaced it with English.
Exactly, and those changes impacted Lebanon, North Africa, and everywhere. Now we're seeing the opposite transition happening. You're seeing that through popular uprisings that are expressing themselves. We're seeing the anti-hijab movement in Iran. We're seeing the same exercises happening in Egypt. We're seeing them in Kuwait. We're seeing them across in Saudi Arabia and others. And I think even in Lebanon, we're seeing that.
But in Tunisia, the Islamists have won power in a democratic election.
But the president is in control, and I don't think the president comes. Qais Said does not come from Islamist background. He is more in control. He's not an ideological. The previous president came from a Nahda party. So the way things are advancing, I think we're going in a different direction in the Muslim world, in specific in the Arab world. And that social change will always express itself when it comes to politics. So if you look at Lebanon, for example, the recent uprising in 2019 got us to a place where we were capable of beating traditional parties based on sects. And that is
yours
fundamental.
is a party that is not based on sect.
Exactly, it's a secular party on a national program with a focus on reform that is fundamentally working on applying the constitution and ending the influence of religious institutions directly on the mainstream politics and governance of Lebanon. I think this is something that is progressing gradually all across. That consolidation is leading us to a different place, but I'll add one more thing. As the world weans off of oil and alternative energies come in, then the balance of power between oil producing countries and their ability to pay their populations, which are growing because the demographic growth, whether in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia, or in Iraq
Egypt
and
is
others.
not oil producing though.
It is now with the gas, the Eastern Mediterranean gas, and all of that.
Yeah.
Gradually, and more importantly, the gas explorations with the recent one that they just did is just increasing the percentage of GDP acquired through oil and gas, or oil investments, or liquid natural gas as well. And I think the investment of the Gulf in Egypt, trying to link the oil that is produced on the eastern borders of Saudi Arabia, next to the Arabian Gulf, all the way to the Red Sea, and then from there pumping it through Egypt. I think there's a big exploration happening there, and there's a big investment.
Understood.
East Mediterranean Gas Agreement, which includes Italy, Greece, France, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt as well, that and Jordan, that coming together will also create a hub that will supply Europe.
Yeah,
but
so basically this is the advantage Saudi Arabia is getting because of the Russia-Ukraine war, but you think this party will not last forever.
Everyone knows with Europe moving away from fossil fuels, the US as well, most of the funding going into alternative energy projects, on job creation, on technology. I think with time that will also cause a shift in who has economic power, which would influence the interest of politicians in serving that economic power. Whether you're a monarchy, a dictatorship, or a democracy, you want to have more income for your state, a more prosperous situation. So you take that and you work with it. And I think we're all going in that direction, which would increase inter-exchanges and investments. Now we're seeing Saudis buying up refineries or companies in India. That is interesting to see and to keep up with. We're seeing India having bigger arms deals and more investments across. The growth rate in terms of population or GDP in India is also impacting how much exports you got from the Arab world, from Central Asia and other areas. So I think that
So you're
will
talking,
help.
this is a time of tectonic shifts, so
Exactly,
and things
in
will
terms
change.
of
Now,
economic,
whilst the shift happens, let's now talk about Lebanon, because you've been talking about the financial crisis, a potential implosion of the entire economy, banks going under, bursting. You've been talking about a dysfunctional political system, in particular the districts, the constituencies, even the arrangement. Where do you think Lebanon is headed in the near future, 3 to 6 months to a year? And what do you think has to be done to make sure Lebanon has a better future and it doesn't become a completely failed state?
I think the fundamental thing is Lebanon today is a historic case. We had, the government is insolvent.
Yeah.
The central bank is insolvent.
Yeah. Your central bank was evading arrest.
Exactly. He's on the run in Europe. 7 countries are filing lawsuits against the governor of the central bank. You've
Unbelievable.
got public institutions, electricity company, water company, and others that have gone under as well. And you have the entire banking sector, which came up in flames because they're insolvent as well. So this is a unique, multifaceted bankruptcy in a state. Such case has never happened before. It's the worst economic situation in the history of mankind for the past 150 years. And the way
the
things
World
are
Bank
moving
has
now,
been talking about it. Everyone's been talking about it in the world of finance and economics, that the situation is just extraordinarily dire.
Exactly. And at that case, you cannot go for gradual reforms. So in the coming 3 to 6 months, it's more about building the political will for massive reforms. We've been in this crisis for 3 years. No action has been taken. So having no action makes it a penalty on the poorest and the weakest.
Absolutely.
Because they're living
Absolutely.
with no health coverage, no public services. We only have 2 hours of electricity a day for the past year. So people wake up at 4 a.m. to do their laundry because they can't afford private generators or they don't have solar panels or others. But one probably of the good things of the crisis is we installed about 500 megawatts of solar panels in 2 years in Lebanon. We were importing them like there's no tomorrow, installing them because people had no other option to provide electricity just to charge their phones, run their refrigerators and others. So the way things are going now, the only way out for us is to get an IMF deal a proper IMF deal that will allow the country to transition towards...
Here's a question.
Yeah.
The IMF has a terrible track record in terms of wherever it has gone, and it's generally gone to countries, for instance, like Pakistan, 17 times. And what happens? The moment money comes into Pakistan, property prices in Dubai rise the very next day. The elite just steals the money away. And this is the case in Argentina to some degree as well, which is also there with a begging bowl in front of the IMF.
Yeah.
So countries that go to the IMF tend to be countries that fundamentally lurch from crisis to crisis. Countries that have done well are countries with fundamentally functional economies who don't have to go to the IMF, because the IMF record is, oh, austerity, cut everything right now. And there isn't this sense of reality of a third world country or a crisis-ridden economy.
In the IMF in Lebanon looks more like a left-of-center political party with their reform plan. Honestly, it's very funny because I agree on everything you said when it comes to applying the IMF standards to other countries. But in Lebanon, it looks like a socialist organization.
Because you have 300,000 bureaucrats, I just heard.
Definitely.
What are they doing?
Stamping papers.
Okay.
But
the French left you with that.
Colonial powers have a big legacy. But if you look at the orientation we're going, IMF is very important for us because it can't get any worse.
I see.
And you need those reforms, and obviously the reason we got there is because we depleted our ability to do reforms locally. So what's more important is not the money we're getting from the IMF. It's 3 billion. We get 9 billion in remittances. India, Lebanon, Philippines are some of the countries with the highest remittance rates.
The Lebanese have done extraordinarily well all around the world.
And they send money back home continuously. So we get 9 billion a year from expats. We're getting 3 billion from the IMF. It's not going to change everything, but we need that pressure to get reforms, to fix the electricity company, to settle the bank debts, to make sure the government has enough financials to provide social security, to provide transportation. Those are fundamentals that we cannot live without.
Understood. Now, I know you have to go shortly, so I'll try to keep things brief as I can. A lot of analysts in diplomacy and intelligence have often said that Lebanon is cursed by history and geography. History because it was a state dreamt up by Mr. Sykes and Monsieur Picot over port and cigars and maps of lines on maps, and the arrangement was completely arbitrary. Geography because you have Israel to your south, which has played a role in the country. Syria, again, which is still playing a role. I'm sure Israel is as well. You've got Iran not too far away. You've got the US. You've got Russia as well. You've got Turkey. And so it has become a cockpit for the jostling of bigger powers. Of course, I forgot to mention Saudi Arabia. They too played a role. Would you agree with that comment?
Unfortunately, the history of our country at the crossroads between Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and Europe is definitely a crucial point and very strategic in its location. Especially that Lebanon's heyday was achieved because of our big ports that were
your
the
descendants
main
of the Phoenicians.
Exactly. The central point for trade with the interior of the Arab world. But I think the current situation now with the weak state, it's allowing us to become the favorite playground for regional politics. I think adopting a neutral stance in terms of foreign policy, stabilizing our relationships, and the conflicts that we have, whether Israeli aggressive actions against us or Syrian threats along our border, I think those are fundamental for us to defend, but we need a state.
We need a functioning state, and the reality is that with economic collapse, with financial trouble for people, you mentioned armed groups rise in power. So you have a state, but maybe the risk you face is you'll be left with a rump state, and actors like Hezbollah might be actually running society.
And this is one of our biggest challenges. An organized militia like Hezbollah, which is completely tied to the policies of Iran, will execute Iran's agenda at the expense of the Lebanese public interest. and we move from that to chaos, because if one group has all that leverage, everyone else will try to get the same leverage.
Such as other groups, such as
Sunni organizations, Christian organizations, because we're a sectarian
of
patchwork
yeah.
in Lebanon. So everyone will go for a means to protect their group. And if groups become stronger, then the central government becomes tied up.
So Yugoslavia,
exactly. So
like
it will fragment.
Yeah.
Now Lebanon is unique in that sense because Lebanon, the communities are intermixed. So you don't really have border lines that are clear cut. And the country is very small, so splitting it up doesn't really work.
People don't want to San Marino, as you said.
Exactly. They don't want to be a state that's just living off tourism for a few months, but they can't produce anything, because then you don't really have a state. You'd have a city-state, which takes us back to the Phoenicians 6,000 years before.
But that may not be such a bad option. If civil war is the other option.
It's 2022, it's 2023, sorry. So we need to be looking towards the future. But Lebanon has always been, especially through its golden years in the 50s and 60s, the place where financial transactions, where the different...
It was the Paris of the East.
Exactly. I hate that terminology. I don't like to be compared to anyone else, especially a colonial power. So
my apologies.
No
my
worries.
apologies.
But the way things go, I think Lebanon can again play a role, because our human capital, our institutions and education and others will allow us to do that. We need the good governance.
Good. So, last question. You're a reformist. What reforms do you want, and what reforms will you bring in? Let's say if you had power tomorrow.
Judicial independence, to hold everyone accountable, because accountability is fundamental. Two, I would say squeezing the size of the state and allowing for more popular investment into functions. Three is decentralization, where we allow local units to serve the people closely and follow up on public services there without having to take them to the central state, splitting it up among political mass parties. So we have a more independent administration as well, to provide for those services without having politics jockey around with people's rights.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank
a
you.
Pleasure and honor.
Same
I hope to see you again on Fair Observer.
I hope so too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.